Hey guys, tonight we begin with something brutal, bloody and absolutely miserable. Life as a Viking raider. Not as a jarl, not as a legendary warrior. No golden arm rings, no epic sagas. Tonight you're not Ragnar Lothbrok. You're just you, shivering in a longboat somewhere off the coast of nowhere with salt water in your boots and regret in your heart. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up on a Viking longboat in the year 872. The good news? You're headed for glory and plunder. The bad news? You've been at sea for 3 weeks, and glory smells suspiciously like vomit and despair. Your bed is the wooden deck, covered in a sheepskin that's been soaked and dried by salt water so many times it's basically maritime jerky. There's no cabin, no privacy, no below deck. Just you, 30 other unwashed men, and the North Atlantic's mood swings. You blink awake to find your face covered in frost because, surprise, it's always freezing on the open ocean. Your wool cloak weighs approximately as much as a dead seal from accumulated moisture, and it provides about as much warmth as wishful thinking. The frost isn't the delicate Christmas card kind either. It's aggressive ice that's invaded your beard, your eyebrows, and somehow the inside of your nostrils. Every breath feels like inhaling tiny daggers, and your first movement of the day cracks the ice that's formed on your clothes like you're some kind of failed human glacier. The boat rocks violently because Viking longboats were designed for speed, not comfort. They're basically oversized canoes with delusions of grandeur. Shallow draft means every wave is a personal attack on your spine and internal organs. The boat doesn't ride over waves, it punches through them like a drunken boxer, and you're the punching bag. Oh, and that romantic image of Vikings standing proudly at the prow, hair flowing in the wind. Forget it. You're hunched over trying not to projectile vomit on the guy rowing in front of you. Seasickness isn't occasional, it's a lifestyle choice. The boat moves in ways that shouldn't be physically possible. It rolls, it pitches, it yaws, and occasionally it does this thing where it seems to levitate briefly before crashing down in a way that rearranges your internal organs. Your breakfast, assuming you can keep it down, is hardtack. A biscuit so dense archaeologists have found intact pieces from the 9th century. It's less food, more dental assault. You gnaw on it like a desperate beaver while your gums start to bleed. Welcome to the early stages of scurvy, friend. The hardtack has the consistency of compressed sawdust and the flavour of disappointment. Sometimes there are weevils in it, little protein bonuses that crunch when you bite down. The veterans tell you to be grateful for the weevils. At least they're fresh meat. Around you, your fellow raiders are in various states of decomposition. Some are rowing, their hands wrapped in rags because the blisters popped days ago, and now it's just raw meat gripping wood. Others are bailing water because these boats leak like gossip in a small village. The water isn't just seawater either. It's a toxic soup of bilge, human waste, and whatever died in the bottom of the boat last week. The smell. Oh, the smell. It's a complex bouquet of rotting feet, fermented fish, unwashed bodies and that special tang of human waste. Because when nature calls at sea, you're hanging your bare posterior over the side, hoping a wave doesn't give you the world's worst bidet experience. And yes, this is exactly as dangerous as it sounds. More than one Viking has been swept overboard mid-movement, leaving behind only a legend and a very specific type of nightmare for his shipmates. Let's talk about the social dynamics of 30 unwashed men trapped in a wooden prison for months. There's Olaf, who insists on singing the same 3 songs every night, despite having a voice that could curdle mead. There's Bjorn, who's developed a cough that sounds like he's trying to expel his soul through his lungs. And there's always that one guy who somehow still thinks this was a good idea and won't shut up about all the gold he's going to win. Personal space doesn't exist. You're literally touching someone at all times. When you sleep, you're spooning strangers for warmth. When you row, you're synchronized not by choice, but by the cruel necessity of not hitting each other with oars. Privacy is a distant memory. You've seen things, terrible things, like Eric's infected toe collection, or Magnus's creative interpretations of personal hygiene. And this is the easy part. The actual raiding hasn't even started yet. So you've been rowing for approximately 17 hours straight. Your hands aren't hands anymore. They're meat mittens held together by willpower and infected blisters. The oar weighs as much as a small tree and moves through water like you're stirring concrete. Each stroke is a negotiation between your screaming muscles and your desire not to be thrown overboard for slacking. Rowing isn't the romantic, synchronized adventure you see in movies. It's repetitive, soul-crushing labour that makes you question every life choice that led to this moment. Your back screams, your shoulders burn, and your arse has gone from numb to actively plotting revenge. The rhythm is relentless. Pull, lift, extend, drop, pull, lift, extend, drop. Hour after hour, day after day, until the motion is so ingrained you find yourself rowing in your sleep. The rowing benches are just planks. No cushions, no back support, no mercy. Your spine is slowly reshaping itself into a question mark, and that's before considering the splinters. Oh, the splinters. They're not just in your hands. They've colonized your entire body like tiny wooden insurgents. Every surface of the boat seems specifically designed to inject wood fragments into your flesh. You've got splinters in places splinters shouldn't be able to reach. There are splinters in your splinters. When you're not rowing, you're still moving because sitting still means freezing to death. The boat is constantly wet from spray, rain, and the tears of regret. Salt water has infiltrated every piece of clothing, turning wool into sandpaper and leather into something that resembles and smells like a bog corpse. Your clothes don't dry, they just achieve different states of wet. There's soaking wet, there's damp, and there's that special kind of moist that feels like wearing depression. The salt is everywhere. It's in your clothes, your hair, your beard, under your fingernails, and somehow inside your ears. You're essentially being slowly cured like a ham. Your skin cracks and bleeds from the constant exposure. Lips split, hands crack, and any exposed skin develops a texture somewhere between leather and tree bark. Frostbite starts at the extremities. First your toes go numb, then your fingers, then parts you'd really rather keep functional. You watch your fingernails turn black and wonder if this is what the Scalds meant by glory. The cold isn't just uncomfortable, it's a living thing that hates you personally. It finds every gap in your clothing, every weakness in your resolve. Some men have already lost toes. They keep them as souvenirs, wrapped in cloth, little frozen reminders that Valhalla better be worth it, because Midgard is actively trying to kill you. There's a whole economy of missing digits on the boat. I'll trade you 2 toes for that extra cloak. Throw in a fingertip and it's a deal. The veterans know what's coming. They've done this before, the crazy bastards. They tell stories of previous raids, but you notice they never mention the treasure they won. Instead, they talk about who didn't come back, who lost what body part, and who went mad from the scurvy. These stories are supposed to be motivational. They are not. Scurvy kicks in around week 4. Your teeth feel loose, like they're considering career options outside your mouth. Your gums bleed when you breathe too hard. Old wounds refuse to heal, and new ones appear for no reason, like your body's running a clearance sale on functioning. Your joints ache, your energy disappears, and you develop a charming rash that makes you look like you're slowly transforming into a leopard, if leopards were dying and miserable. The veterans know the signs. They've seen men's teeth fall out mid-conversation, watched strong warriors become too weak to row, because their bodies are literally falling apart from the inside. Vitamin C is centuries away from being discovered, but your body knows something's missing and it's not happy about it. Some try to combat it by chewing on pine needles when they can find them, or eating raw seal liver, which is somehow worse than the scurvy. Food gets worse by the day. The fish you salted 3 weeks ago has developed its own ecosystem. There are things growing on it that might be new forms of life. The water tastes like it's been filtered through a gym sock, and the mead ran out after day 2. Now you're drinking whatever liquid doesn't immediately kill you, including but not limited to rainwater collected in helmets with bonus rust flavouring, melted ice when available, and something the cook claims is soup but looks suspiciously like dishwater with ambitions. The cook, by the way, is whoever drew the short straw. He has no training, no skills, and no ingredients that haven't gone bad. His primary qualification is that he's slightly less likely to poison everyone than the last guy. Meals are a game of chance where the prize is not dying and the consolation prize is wishing you had. Sleep is a joke the ocean tells at your expense. You try to rest, but the boat has other plans. Just as you drift off, a wave hits, and suddenly you're airborne, then crashed back down onto wooden planks that seem to have gotten harder while you were briefly flying. The motion never stops. Even in calm seas, the boat rocks with a rhythm designed by someone who hates human comfort. When you do manage to sleep, the dreams are worse than the reality. You dream of dry land, warm fires, and food that doesn't fight back. Then you wake up to find Sven's foot in your face and remember that this is your life now. This is what you chose. You could have been a farmer, but no, you had to chase glory. But hey, at least when you finally spot land, you'll get to raid, right? Time for glory and gold, and definitely not a muddy, terrifying slog through hostile territory, while locals try to cave your skull in. "Land ahoy!" someone shouts, and your heart lifts for exactly 3 seconds before reality sets in. Because that shoreline isn't a welcome mat, it's a preview of misery. First, you have to beach the longboat, which means jumping into freezing surf that immediately fills your boots with water, sand, and the occasional crab. You and your fellow raiders grunt and heave, dragging a boat that weighs as much as a modest house onto shore while waves try to reclaim it. The water is so cold it feels hot, then numb, then like your legs have been replaced with wooden stumps that don't quite work right. Your legs barely work after weeks of sitting and rowing. They buckle like a newborn deer's, except less cute and more likely to faceplant you into wet sand. Some men literally crawl up the beach, their bodies refusing to remember how walking works. It's humiliating, but everyone's too exhausted to mock anyone else. You're all equally pathetic. The beach landing is chaos. 30 men trying to remember how to be warriors while their bodies revolt. Someone trips over the anchor rope and takes down 3 others. Weapons are dropped, retrieved, dropped again. One man's shield gets caught in the surf and pulls him back into the ocean like the sea wants a souvenir. It would be comedic if it weren't so desperate. Now soaking wet, exhausted and probably hypothermic, you get to start your glorious raid. Except raids aren't glorious. They're mostly mud, panic and disappointment, with occasional bouts of absolute terror. You thought you'd be storming castles. Instead, you're trudging through a marsh because some genius decided to attack during the rainy season. Your boots, designed for ship decks, not cross-country hiking, sink into mud that seems personally offended by your presence. Each step makes a sound like the earth is trying to eat you. Schlorp, squelch. The mud has moods. Sometimes it's shallow and merely annoying. Other times it's waist-deep and actively malevolent. Every step is a battle against suction that wants to keep your footwear as a souvenir. More than one warrior has had to choose between their boots and their dignity. Most choose dignity and spend the rest of the raid barefoot, stepping on things that squish, crunch, or occasionally bite. The locals, clever bastards, know their terrain. They've probably been watching you struggle through their strategically maintained swamp, taking bets on who falls face first into the bog. The monastery you're targeting isn't some golden palace of treasures. It's a collection of stone buildings surrounded by wooden walls, manned by monks who've decided they'd rather die than hand over their 2 silver candlesticks and a really nice manuscript. These aren't the helpless holy men you expected. These are monks who've been raided before, monks who've taken up weapons training between prayers, monks who are surprisingly good at improvising weapons from agricultural equipment. Combat, when it happens, is nothing like the sagas. It's chaotic, terrifying, and mostly involves trying not to slip in mud while someone swings farming equipment at your head. There's no choreography, no honour, just desperate people doing desperate things. Your weapon training, such as it was, didn't cover how to fight while knee-deep in mud, against a monk wielding a shovel like he was born to it. Your axe gets stuck in a wooden shield. Your backup knife is still on the boat, and the monk you're fighting turns out to be surprisingly good with that shovel. You're not a warrior. You're a wet, exhausted man playing a very dangerous game of tag where being it means potentially dying. The sagas talk about berserkers and battle fury. What you're experiencing is more like panic-induced flailing while trying not to soil yourself. The other raiders aren't doing much better. Thorvald is being chased by a goose, not metaphorically, an actual goose that seems to have taken personal offence to his presence. Ragnar is stuck in mud up to his thighs, swinging wildly at anyone who comes near, friend or foe. Eric has managed to set himself on fire somehow, despite everything being soaking wet. If you're lucky, you might grab a few coins, some cloth, maybe a decorative cross. If you're unlucky, you get an arrow in the shoulder from a farmer who's been practicing specifically for this moment. The farmers, it turns out, really don't appreciate Viking visits. They've formed militias, set up warning systems, and gotten surprisingly good at guerrilla warfare. That peasant with a pitchfork? He's killed 3 raiders before you, and he's looking to improve his record. Most raids net barely enough to cover the trip. Successful raids, the ones that make it into sagas, are rare. Most times you're fighting over livestock and grain stores, arguing about who gets the one decent cloak you found. The legendary Viking horde? It's 3 chickens, a sack of turnips, and a bronze pin that might be gold if you squint. The chickens, by the way, are not cooperative. Have you ever tried to steal a chicken? They're basically feathered demons with a personal vendetta against anyone trying to transport them. They peck, they scratch, they scream like they're auditioning for an exorcism. By the time you get them back to the boat, you're bleeding from 17 different places and questioning whether eggs are really worth this. The locals aren't helpless victims either. They've been raided before. They hide their valuables, bury their silver, and generally make your job as difficult as possible. By the time you arrive, anything worth stealing is either gone or defended by people who have nothing left to lose. The monastery's treasury. It's been empty for years. That golden cross you were hoping for. It's made of painted wood. The real valuables are buried in the woods, guarded by knowledge you'll never have. And here's the part the sagas leave out. Even successful raids mean carrying heavy loot back to the boat through the same mud, while potentially being chased by very angry locals who've gathered reinforcements. You're trying to run through a marsh carrying a sack of grain and 2 chickens, while Bjorn behind you is bleeding from a head wound and insisting he's fine despite clearly being not fine. The chickens are putting up more fight than the monks did. The retreat is worse than the attack. Now you're tired, possibly wounded, definitely demoralized and carrying extra weight. The locals know you're leaving and they want their stuff back. Arrows fly from hidden positions. Farmers emerge from hiding spots with improvised weapons and generations of pent-up anger. That easy path you took to get here, it's been blocked. That stream you crossed, it's risen, and now you have to ford it while being pelted with rocks. Back at the boat, if you make it, you discover that loading stolen goods onto a longboat in rough surf is somehow worse than unloading. You're chest deep in freezing water, trying to keep a bag of silver dry while waves try to dash your brains against your own boat. The chickens have escaped and are making a break for freedom down the beach. Someone has to chase them, and that someone is you because you're the newest raider, and apparently chicken wrangling is an entry-level position. Half the loot gets water damaged. A quarter falls overboard, and what's left has to be divided among 30 men who all believe they fought the hardest. Arguments break out, fists fly, and suddenly you're fighting your own crew over a bent bronze brooch and 3 yards of mediocre cloth. The great Viking brotherhood you heard about? It's more like a dysfunctional family fighting over a will, except the inheritance is some mouldy grain and a cross that's probably not even silver. Then it's back to sea, except now you're injured, exhausted, and carrying extra weight that makes the boat sit lower water. Every wave is a reminder that the ocean wants you dead and your career choices were questionable. The boat, already overloaded with too many men, now has the added burden of disappointing plunder and several wounded raiders who need to lie down in space that doesn't exist. The journey home is worse than the journey out. You're tired, supplies are lower, and everyone's in a foul mood because it turns out raiding is less glorious adventure and more violent camping trip with worse food and higher mortality. The initial excitement has worn off, replaced by the grim realization that you've risked everything for barely enough to pay off your debts. Navigation becomes a problem. The navigator, who swore he knew these waters like his mother's face, is looking increasingly worried. Clouds obscure the sun, fog rolls in, and suddenly no one's quite sure which direction home is. You could be rowing in circles, you could be heading for Greenland, you could be sailing off the edge of the world for all anyone knows. The navigator consults his sunstone, but it's about as reliable as a fortune cookie. Arguments break out about direction. Should you follow the birds, the currents, that suspicious piece of driftwood that might be from your homeland or might be from anywhere? Democracy isn't a Viking strength, and these debates usually end with whoever shouts loudest or threatens most convincingly. Sometimes you change direction 3 times in a day because 3 different people won the argument. Infections set in where weapons found flesh. That small cut on your hand is now swollen and oozing something that definitely wasn't part of the original design. Without antibiotics, a minor wound can become a death sentence, and everyone knows it. The boat's medical supplies consist of dirty rags, prayers, and a knife for amputation when things go really wrong. The medical officer is whoever has the steadiest hands after drinking, which isn't saying much. Men develop fevers, shake uncontrollably, and ramble about home while their wounds turn colours that don't exist in nature. The smell of infection mixes with all the other smells, creating an olfactory assault that makes you nostalgic for when you only smelled like wet dog and despair. You try to clean wounds with seawater, which is like trying to put out a fire with oil. It makes things worse, but at least you feel like you're doing something. Some don't make it home. Their bodies are wrapped in whatever's available and slipped overboard with a few words about Valhalla that everyone's starting to suspect might just be really effective marketing. The funeral rites are quick, perfunctory. There's no time for elaborate ceremonies when you're trying not to join the deceased. A few words, a splash, and then back to rowing because the dead don't help with navigation. The psychological toll is something the sagas definitely skip. You've seen friends die for a sack of barley. You've killed farmers who were just defending their homes. You've stolen from monks who fed the poor. The glory you were promised tastes a lot like ash and regret. At night, when you can't sleep because of the cold and the rocking and the man next to you dying of gangrene, you wonder what glory even means. Some men break. They start laughing at nothing, talking to people who aren't there, or just staring at the horizon with empty eyes. Viking madness, they call it. Really, it's just what happens when you put humans through months of physical and psychological torture for the promise of wealth that usually doesn't materialize. The mad ones are actually the lucky ones. They've escaped into their own minds where the boat doesn't smell like death, and the food is edible. Storms hit when you least expect them. The North Atlantic has a sense of humour, and that humour is dark. One moment you're making good progress, the next you're in waves the size of buildings, bailing for your life while Thor himself seems to be personally trying to drown you. The sail, if you're lucky enough to have one up, shreds like tissue paper. Oars snap like twigs. Men go overboard and disappear into the black water before anyone can even scream their name. During storms, there's no rowing, no steering, just holding on and praying to whatever gods might be listening. You're not sailors anymore. You're barely floating victims of the ocean's wrath. Everything not tied down goes overboard, including sometimes the loot you risked everything for. You watch a bag of silver disappear into a wave and feel nothing because you're too busy trying not to follow it. If you survive, if you make it home, you'll have enough plunder to maybe buy a new cloak and fix your roof. You'll spend months recovering from malnutrition, frostbite, and whatever infection is slowly eating your sword hand. Your body will never quite work right again. That shoulder wound will ache every winter. Those missing toes will make walking interesting. The scurvy damage to your teeth means eating will be an adventure in pain. Your wife will look at your pathetic haul and wonder why you didn't just stay home and farm. She's been keeping the household running, raising the children, managing the farm, and now you've returned with barely enough to cover the debts you took on to fund this stupid adventure. She doesn't say it, but you can see it in her eyes. She could have earned more spinning wool. Your kids will ask why Daddy smells like death and walks funny. You'll try to tell them stories of adventure, but they'll notice you never mention treasure or glory, just cold and death and disappointment. They'll grow up knowing their father chose to leave them for months to steal chickens and catch diseases. The heroic Viking warrior they imagined has been replaced by a broken man who flinches at the sound of waves. Your neighbours who didn't go raiding will have had a better harvest and fewer missing fingers. They'll politely not mention that their boring, safe choice to stay home and farm has left them healthier, wealthier, and happier than your glorious adventure. Their biggest adventure was chasing an escaped pig through the village. They still have all their toes. The Jarl who organised this raid, who promised wealth and glory, he's taking his cut first, of course. By the time he's done, and the boat owner has taken his share, and various other expenses are accounted for, your portion of the loot is laughable. You've risked everything for the equivalent of a month's farming income, except farming doesn't usually cost you body parts. But hey, at least you got a story out of it. A story you'll embellish more each time you tell it, until eventually you are fighting dragons and winning kingdoms instead of stealing chickens and getting dysentery. The truth is too depressing to share, so you'll lie. You'll talk about the glory, the adventure, the brotherhood. You'll skip the parts about crying from cold, shitting yourself from bad water, and watching friends die for nothing. These sagas that will be written, they'll be based on these lies. Each generation of storytellers will add more glory, more gold, more heroism. The freezing, terrified boys who spent months vomiting in a leaky boat will become legendary warriors who feared nothing. The failed raid on a monastery that netted 3 chickens and a brass candlestick will become an epic battle for magnificent treasures. Future generations will read these sagas and dream of being Vikings, never knowing that the reality was a bunch of malnourished men with frostbite arguing over who gets the least diseased chicken. They'll imagine noble warriors instead of desperate farmers trying to make a quick buck through violence. They'll picture gleaming swords and magnificent longboats instead of rusty axes and leaking wooden tubs. Let's talk about what happens to Viking raiders long term, shall we? 'Cause even if you survive one raid, the peer pressure to go again is immense. You can't just do one raid. That makes you look weak, so you go again and again, each time losing a little more of your body and soul. The veterans, the ones who've survived multiple raids, look at them closely. They're not inspiring. They're walking cautionary tales, missing fingers, missing toes, scars that look like a map of bad decisions. They've got that 1,000-yard stare that comes from seeing too many friends drown, freeze, or die from infected wounds. They drink constantly, not for pleasure but to forget. Their bodies are wrecked, joints destroyed from years of rowing, backs permanently bent from hunching in boats, hands that can't fully close from repeated frostbite. They move like old men at 30, ancient at 40 if they live that long. The glory they earned. It's measured in chronic pain and nightmares about drowning. Some turn to increasingly desperate raids. When raiding monasteries stops being profitable because the monks have gotten too good at hiding things, you start raiding other raiders. Viking on Viking violence becomes common. The Brotherhood of the Sea turns into paranoid bands of armed men who trust no one. Today's ally is tomorrow's target. The successful Vikings, the ones whose names make it into sagas. They're usually the ones who got lucky once, made a big score, and then had the sense to stop. They used their loot to buy land, settle down, and never set foot on a longboat again. The real winners are the ones who quit while they're ahead, but their stories don't make good sagas. Bjorn the Sensible, who retired after one good raid, doesn't have the same ring as Eric Bloodaxe. Let's examine a typical successful raid, shall we? The target, a wealthy monastery on the coast of England. The plan, swift attack at dawn, grab the gold, get out. The reality, very different. First, the monastery has been raided before. They've learned. The gold, buried in 7 different locations in the forest. The silver, melted down and hidden in the walls. The manuscripts, copied and distributed to other monasteries, with only the copies left as bait. The monks, they've hired mercenaries. You arrive at dawn to find the monastery looks abandoned. Great, you think, easy pickings. You break down the door to find nothing. Empty rooms, empty altar. Even the kitchen has been cleared out. You search frantically, tearing apart everything, finding nothing but wooden crosses and books you can't read. Then the locals attack. They've been waiting in the woods, warned by a system of signal fires. Suddenly you're surrounded by angry farmers, trained militia, and those mercenaries the monks hired. Your easy raid has become a trap. The hunters have become the hunted. Half your force dies in the first few minutes. The rest scatter, trying to make it back to the boats. But the locals know their land. They know every path, every hiding spot. They pick you off one by one. By the time you reach the beach, there are only 12 of you left from the original 30. The boats. One has been burned by a local raiding party. You pile into the remaining boat, overloaded, undermanned, trying to row while bleeding from multiple wounds. The journey home is a nightmare of dying men. no supplies, and the growing realization that you've lost everything for nothing. This is a successful raid by Viking standards because at least some of you made it home. The unsuccessful raids? Those are the ones where no one returns, where entire crews simply vanish into the sea or foreign lands, leaving behind only worried families and unpaid debts. The economics of raiding are brutal. You need to fund the expedition. This means borrowing money, trading future plunder for current supplies. If the raid fails, you're in debt. If you die, your family is in debt. The lenders, usually wealthy jarls, always get paid. They fund 10 raids, 2 succeed, they still profit. You fund your own raid, it fails, you lose everything. Many Vikings become trapped in a cycle of raiding to pay off debts from previous failed raids. Each expedition is more desperate, more risky, because you need a bigger score to break even. It's like gambling addiction, but with more frostbite and death. The house always wins, and the house is owned by the Jarl who stays warm at home. Weather prediction in the Viking Age is essentially guessing based on how your joints hurt and which way the birds are flying. You leave in what seems like good weather, arrive in a storm. You plan to raid in summer, arrive in autumn. Navigation is equally precise. We should hit land somewhere between Scotland and Spain is considered accurate navigation. Lost Viking ships are common. They set out for England, end up in Iceland, or nowhere. The North Atlantic is littered with longboats that guessed wrong about weather, direction, or both. Sometimes, years later, fishermen find Viking artifacts washing up on shores thousands of miles from where they should be, the only evidence of another failed expedition. The actual fighting techniques of Viking raiders are less berserker rage and more try not to die. Despite the sagas, most Vikings aren't elite warriors, they're farmers with swords, and it shows. Your combat training consists of stick them with the pointy end and try not to get stuck by their pointy end. Advanced techniques include run away and hide behind Bjorn, shield walls, the famous Viking formation. They work great in open fields with trained warriors. They work terribly in muddy monasteries with farmers who've been handed weapons 5 minutes ago. The shield wall breaks immediately, usually because someone trips, and then it's every man for himself in a chaotic melee where nobody knows who's winning. Berserkers, those legendary Viking warriors who fought in a trance-like fury. Most of them are just drunk, or eating mushrooms, or both. Their battle fury lasts right up until they run into someone sober who knows how to use a spear. Then they're just dead drunk guys with poor decision-making skills. The weapons are another issue. That legendary Viking sword passed down through generations. It's probably pig iron that bends if you hit something too hard. Quality steel is rare and expensive. Most raiders carry axes because they're cheaper and double as tools. Your weapon is more likely to break than your enemy's skull. Armour. If you're lucky, you have a leather jerkin that provides about as much protection as a thick sweater. Chainmail is for rich people. Helmets are often just leather caps. The famous horned helmets, they never existed. You know what did exist? Head wounds. Lots and lots of head wounds. Let's talk about the psychological warfare of being raided. The locals have developed their own tactics. They know Vikings fear drowning more than death in battle, so they flood fields, break dams, do anything to create water obstacles. They know Vikings are superstitious, so they leave cursed items for raiders to find. Amazing how many hardened warriors won't touch a cross with strange symbols on it. The locals also use Viking greed against them. They leave obvious treasure in exposed locations, usually trapped or poisoned. That chest of silver you just found sitting conveniently in the open. The locals have coated the coins with something that will make you very sick in about 3 days. By the time you realize it, you're at sea with no cure. Psychological warfare goes both ways. Vikings cultivate a reputation for brutality, partly because it's easier to raid people who surrender immediately. But this reputation means locals fight harder, prepare better, and show no mercy when they win. The fear Vikings inspire often works against them, turning potential easy targets into desperate fighters. Disease is the silent killer of Viking raids. You're taking men from isolated communities, cramming them together in unsanitary conditions, then exposing them to foreign diseases. A cold becomes pneumonia. A cut becomes sepsis. Dysentery runs through the crew like wildfire. More Vikings die from disease than combat, but Thorstein the Mighty died of the shits doesn't make it into sagas. The medical knowledge of the age doesn't help. Treatments include bleeding, making blood loss worse, prayers, effectiveness dubious, and cauterization, infection, but with extra burning. The ship's medicine chest contains honey, actually useful, alcohol, mostly drunk for non-medical purposes, and various herbs that might help or might be poison. It's essentially healthcare by guesswork. Dental health on raids is catastrophic. Between scurvy, hardtack and combat, you're losing teeth at an alarming rate. Viking dentistry consists of pulling teeth with pliers or letting them fall out naturally. By the end of a long raid, the crew looks like a hockey team after playoffs, except less cheerful and with more systemic infections. Let's discuss Viking raid logistics that sagas conveniently ignore. Food storage on a longboat is basically hope it doesn't rot too fast. There's no refrigeration, limited salt for preservation, and everything gets wet eventually. The fish you caught last week? It's developing its own ecosystem. The bread? It's now a science experiment in mold cultivation. Water storage is even worse. Wooden barrels leak. Leather pouches make everything taste like leather. And after a few weeks, all water tastes like it's been filtered through a sock because essentially it has. You're drinking water that's been sloshing around in containers that have never been properly cleaned, mixed with whatever sea spray gets in. It's a miracle anyone survives the hydration alone. Cooking on a longboat is theoretically possible, but practically suicidal. Open flames on a wooden boat soaked in tar and filled with flammable materials. What could go wrong? So most food is eaten cold, raw, or in states of decomposition that would horrify modern health inspectors. When you do cook on shore, it's over smoky fires with improvised equipment, creating meals that taste of smoke, dirt, and desperation. The bathroom situation deserves its own saga. There are no facilities. You're hanging over the side in rough seas, or using a bucket that has to be emptied over the side, usually into the wind because nature hates you. Privacy doesn't exist. Dignity is a distant memory, and everyone has digestive issues from the terrible food and water, so this is happening constantly. Imagine 30 men with chronic diarrhea on a small boat for months. The smell alone could be classified as a war crime. The constant need to relieve yourself while rowing, fighting, or sleeping creates a special kind of misery. And when storms hit, you can't hang over the side, so Let's just say the boat's interior becomes even more nightmarish. Viking navigation relies on landmarks, stars and optimism. The famous sunstone. It works great when you can see the sun. In the North Atlantic, with its constant clouds and fog, you might as well navigate by throwing bones. Navigators guard their knowledge jealously, partly because it's valuable, and partly because they're making half of it up as they go. "I know these waters," says the navigator confidently, having been here once 10 years ago in summer, approaching from the opposite direction. The crew nods, having no choice but to trust him. When you end up hundreds of miles off course, he'll blame the currents, the gods, or that time Olaf sneezed and threw off his calculations. Getting lost is so common that Vikings have developed a whole vocabulary for it. There's slightly misplaced, only a few days off course, thoroughly lost, no idea what ocean you're in, and apocalyptically lost. The stars look wrong and everyone's pretty sure you've sailed off the edge of the world. Each comes with its own level of panic and blame assignment. The social dynamics of a lost crew are fascinating. First comes denial. Surely that coastline is just around the next headland. Then bargaining. If we just row harder, we'll find land. Then anger. Whose fault is this? Usually the navigators. Then desperation. Maybe we should eat the weakest member. Finally acceptance. We're going to die. Might as well finish the mead. Mutinies happen, though sagas don't mention them. When the crew realizes the leader has no idea where they are, that supplies are running low, and that their glorious raid has become a death cruise, leadership challenges emerge. These are resolved Viking style, which means violence. The winner gets to be in charge of a doomed ship. Congratulations. Let's talk about the wildlife encounters Vikings face. Whales are terrifying when you're in a small wooden boat. They surface without warning, creating waves that can swamp you. One whale decides to scratch itself on your hull. You're swimming. Orcas are worse. They're smart. They hunt in packs. And some seem to think longboats are either threats or toys. Seabirds seem harmless until you realize they're vectors for disease, and their favourite pastime is defecating on everything. A flock of seabirds can turn your boat into a guano-covered hellscape in minutes. They steal food, spread disease, and their cries at night sound like the damned souls of previous raiders, which, given the mortality rate, they might be. Sharks follow Viking boats, having learned that these vessels often produce bodies. It's unnerving to row knowing that several large predators are waiting for you to make a mistake. Fall overboard in shark-infested waters. Your career as a Viking just ended in the worst possible way. The crew won't even try to save you. They'll just say a quick prayer and keep rowing. Storms deserve special mention because they're not just weather. They're near-death experiences that last for days. The waves aren't just big. They're walls of water that lift your boat vertical before slamming it down. Everything not tied down becomes a projectile. Men not tied down become projectiles. You bail constantly, knowing that if you stop for even a minute, you'll sink. Lightning turns the metal weapons and tools into death traps. The sail, if you are stupid enough to have it up, either tears away or acts like a giant lever trying to flip the boat. The rudder breaks, oars snap, and you're left at the mercy of waves that have no mercy. Survival is mostly luck and stubbornness. After a storm, if you survive, you assess the damage. Missing. Several crew members, most of your supplies, all of your confidence. broken. Mast, multiple oars, everyone's spirit. The boat is barely floating, held together by hope and whatever patches you can improvise. You're still days or weeks from land, assuming you can figure out where land is. Post-storm navigation is especially fun. The storm has blown you somewhere. Where? Who knows? The navigator pretends to take readings while privately panicking. That coastline you spot could be home, could be Greenland, could be somewhere that doesn't have a name yet because no one's been stupid enough to sail there. Weather changes rapidly in the North Atlantic. Morning, calm seas, clear skies, everyone's optimistic. Noon, clouds gathering, wind picking up, experienced sailors looking worried. Evening, full gale, everyone bailing and praying, regretting all life choices. Night, either dead or wishing you were. The cold is omnipresent. It's not just uncomfortable, it's a constant drain on your energy and will to live. Everything is harder when you're cold. Rowing? Your muscles don't work right. Fighting? Your hands can't grip weapons. Thinking? Your brain is too busy trying not to freeze. The cold finds every gap in your clothing and exploits it ruthlessly. Hypothermia is common. The symptoms, confusion, lethargy, poor decision-making, are indistinguishable from normal Viking raider behaviour, so it often goes unnoticed until someone stops responding entirely. The treatment is to huddle together for warmth, which is awkward when everyone smells like death and nobody likes each other anymore. Frostbite takes fingers, toes, noses, ears, any extremity foolish enough to be exposed. The progression is predictable. First numbness, blessed relief, then pain, less blessed, then blackening, definitely not blessed, then bits falling off, career limiting. Veterans learn to check each other's faces for the telltale white patches that signal tissue death. Let's discuss the economics of failure. You've borrowed money to fund this raid. The lender, usually a wealthy jarl, expects repayment with interest. You return with 3 chickens and dysentery. The chickens die. The dysentery doesn't. You now owe more than your farm is worth. Options. Sell your land, become a tenant farmer. Sell yourself, become a thrall. Or go on another raid, repeat cycle. Many Vikings become professional raiders not out of love for adventure, but because they're trapped in debt. Each raid is a desperate gamble to break even. It's like a gambling addiction where the casino is the North Atlantic and the house edge includes scurvy. The few who win big become jarls. The many who lose become cautionary tales told in whispers. The psychological toll on families is brutal. Your wife doesn't know if you're dead or just very late. Your children grow up with an absent father who might return with treasure or might never return at all. Every storm that hits the coast, she wonders if that's the one that killed you. The uncertainty is almost worse than knowing. When you do return, you're not the same person who left. You've seen friends die horribly. You've done things that would horrify your former self. You wake up screaming about drowning. You flinch at sudden movements. You can't explain why the sound of waves makes you want to run inland and never stop. Viking PTSD isn't recognised, but it's real. The community treats returned raiders with a mixture of respect and pity. Respect for surviving, pity for what survival cost. Your neighbours notice you drink more, smile less, and have a 1,000-yard stare that makes children uncomfortable. The glory you sought has curdled into something darker. You're a hero who wishes he'd stayed home. Some raiders cope by going again. The boat is horrible, but at least it's a horrible you understand. The farm feels alien after months at sea. Normal life seems pointless when you face death daily. So you sign up for another raid, chasing something, glory, death, or just an escape from the emptiness. It never works. Others become storytellers, turning their trauma into entertainment. The worse the experience, the better the story, after sufficient editing. That time everyone got dysentery becomes a humorous anecdote. The friend who drowned becomes a hero who died gloriously. The failed raid becomes an epic adventure. The lies are more comfortable than the truth. The successful raiders, the ones who actually find treasure, they often die anyway. Success makes you a target. Other Vikings want your loot. Your own crew might decide they deserve a bigger share. That treasure you buried for safekeeping, someone's watching. The gold you won might as well be a death sentence with a timer. Paranoia becomes a survival trait. You trust no one, not even family. You sleep with weapons, jump at shadows, and constantly check if you're being followed. The treasure that was supposed to make life better has made it infinitely worse. You're rich, but can't enjoy it, because you're too busy trying not to be murdered for it. Some Vikings try to buy respectability with their loot. They build churches, donate to monasteries, try to wash the blood off their gold with good works. It doesn't work. Everyone knows where the money came from. The monks take your donations while secretly hoping you'll die horribly. God, it seems, isn't easily bribed. The irony of Viking raids is that the most successful raiders often end up as farmers anyway. They use their loot to buy land, settle down and never raid again. They become the boring neighbours they used to mock. The circle of life, Viking style, farmer to raider to farmer, with a lot of unnecessary suffering in between. Let's examine the diet in more detail because it's a horror story in itself. The basic Viking raider diet consists of hardtack, indestructible biscuit, dried fish, leather with delusions of being food, salt pork, salt with trace amounts of pork, and whatever you can steal or catch. Nutritional balance. That's for people who don't spend months in boats. Hardtack deserves special hatred. It's a biscuit baked multiple times until all moisture and hope have been removed. It's less food, more building material. You don't eat hardtack, you defeat it. First, you soak it in water, if you have clean water, which you don't. Then you gnaw on it while your teeth file formal complaints. Finally, you swallow chunks that will sit in your stomach like stones. The dried fish starts as cod or herring, but by the time you eat it, species identification is impossible. It's been salted, dried, stored in conditions that would make a health inspector weep, and then reconstituted with whatever liquid is available. It tastes like concentrated ocean with notes of despair. The texture is somewhere between leather and wood chips. Salt pork is the luxury item, which tells you everything about Viking cuisine. It's fatty meat preserved in so much salt it's basically a salt lick with meat flavouring. Eating it makes you thirstier, but water is rationed, so you suffer. The salt burns any cuts in your mouth, and thanks to scurvy, you have many, adding injury to insult. Cooking facilities on a longboat are non-existent. You eat everything cold, raw, or in various states of fermentation. The only heat comes from your burning hatred of the food. Sometimes you catch fresh fish, which is great until you realise you have to eat it raw, because cooking requires fire, and fire plus wooden boat equals swimming. Scurvy, our old friend, makes eating even worse. Your gums bleed, your teeth loosen, and every bite is agony. The lack of vitamin C affects wound healing, so that cutting your mouth from the hardtack never heals. It just gets worse, infected, a constant reminder that your body is falling apart at the cellular level. The psychological effect of terrible food is underestimated. Meal times become ordeals to endure rather than enjoy. You eat to survive, not for pleasure. The constant disgust at your food combines with seasickness to create a perfect storm of misery. Some men stop eating altogether, preferring starvation to another meal of reconstituted fish leather. Water rationing creates its own hell. You're surrounded by water you can't drink. The barrels of fresh water are finite and everyone knows it. Fights break out over who's drinking more than their share. The water itself tastes like the inside of the barrel, woody, musty, with undertones of whatever died in there. As supplies dwindle, creativity increases. Leather armour starts looking edible. Rope made from plant fibres becomes a chew toy. There are stories of crews eating their shoes, though the nutritional value of Viking footwear is questionable. Desperation makes everything look like food. The first rule of Viking raiding: nothing goes according to plan. That detailed strategy worked out before leaving, worthless the moment you hit the beach. The scouts who swore the monastery was undefended, they lied or were wrong. The weather that was supposed to be clear, now it's a hurricane. Adaptability isn't a virtue, it's a necessity. Communication during raids is basically shouting and hoping. There's no coordinated strategy once combat starts. It's every man interpreting vague yells and hand gestures while trying not to die. Attack could mean charge forward, retreat, or dance aggressively. Nobody's sure, so everyone does their own thing. The language barrier adds comedy to tragedy. You're trying to threaten locals into surrendering, but you don't speak their language and they don't speak yours. It's aggressive charades where losing means death. You point at gold and make grabbing motions. They point at weapons and make stabbing motions. Nobody understands anybody. Looting efficiently is harder than it sounds. You need to find valuables, determine what's actually valuable, carry it while potentially being attacked, and do all this quickly. That golden cup, it's brass. That ornate chest, it's full of manuscripts you can't read. That heavy silver cross, it's lead with silver paint. You're risking your life for medieval garage sale items. The logistics of carrying loot are nightmarish. You're already exhausted. Now you're loaded down with stolen goods, trying to run through difficult terrain. Items get dropped, fought over, dropped again. By the time you reach the boat, half the loot is gone, and what remains might not be worth the hernia you've developed. Division of loot follows complex rules that nobody agrees on. The Jarl gets his share, the boat owner gets his, wounded men get extra, if they survive, and everyone argues about who contributed what. That moment of triumph when you grab the silver, now 5 people claim they helped. The accounting would make a tax lawyer weep. Let's talk about the glorious Viking weapons. Your sword, assuming you can afford one, is probably pattern-welded iron that looks pretty but bends in combat. Real Damascus steel is for kings and legends, not farmers pretending to be warriors. Your sword is more likely to break than your enemy's skull, leaving you holding a very expensive handle. Axes are more practical but less glamorous. They're tools first, weapons second. The same axe you used to split wood now has to split skulls, and skulls are surprisingly hard. After a few hits, your axe is dull, chipped, and you're realizing that maybe farming wasn't so bad after all. Spears are the most common weapon because they're cheap and keep enemies at a distance. The downside: in close quarters, like inside a monastery, a spear is just a very awkward stick. You're trying to maneuver a 9-foot pole in a 6-foot room while monks throw pottery at your head. It's less heroic combat, more violent slapstick. Shields are made of wood with minimal reinforcement. They're designed to break, absorbing impact so your arm doesn't. Great in theory, problematic when you're miles from replacement shields and yours just exploded into splinters. Now you're defending yourself with shield remnants and harsh language. Armor is for rich people. You have a leather jerkin that provides about as much protection as a thick sweater. It's been soaked in water, dried in salt air, and now has the flexibility of cardboard and the protective value of hope. Chainmail. That's for jarls and people who don't need to row their own boats. Helmets are basic iron or leather caps. No horns, no wings, just minimal skull protection. They're hot, limit vision, and after a few hits develop dents that press uncomfortably into your head. But they're better than nothing, which is what most raiders have. A leather cap is basically admitting you can't afford proper protection, but don't want to die immediately. The physical demands of raiding break bodies quickly. Rowing for weeks develops specific muscles while letting others atrophy. You're incredibly strong in very specific ways and weak in others. Your back is overdeveloped, your legs are withered, and your cardiovascular system is confused. You're shaped like a question mark with biceps. Combat readiness after weeks at sea is a joke. You stumble off the boat, muscles cramped, coordination shot, and immediately have to fight. It's like asking someone to run a marathon after sitting in a closet for a month. Your body doesn't remember how to fight. It barely remembers how to walk. Injuries accumulate. That shoulder strain from rowing becomes a tear during combat. The infected blister on your hand makes gripping weapons agony. The knee you twisted jumping off the boat gives out at the worst moment. You're not a warrior. You're a collection of injuries held together by stubbornness and peer pressure. Recovery time doesn't exist. Injured? Too bad. Keep rowing. Sick? Row through it. Dying? Row until you actually die, then we'll throw you overboard. There's no medical leave, no light duty. You're either functional enough to work or dead. The middle ground is brief and unpleasant. The psychological warfare aspect of Viking raids is overplayed. Yes, Vikings cultivated a fearsome reputation, but so did everyone else. The locals have their own horror stories about Viking brutality, and they're prepared. That terrifying war cry you practiced. They've heard it before. They're not impressed. They have pointy farm implements and nothing left to lose. Vikings aren't the only ones who fight dirty. Locals poison wells, set traps, use hit-and-run tactics. They know Vikings are terrible at prolonged land campaigns, so they make raiders work for every foot of ground. That easy monastery raid becomes a grinding war of attrition against people who know the terrain and have home field advantage. The weather seems personally offended by Viking raids. Planning a dawn attack? Here's fog so thick you can't see your own feet. Need to retreat quickly. Sudden downpour turns paths into rivers, trying to sail away. The wind dies completely, leaving you rowing desperately while angry locals gather on shore. Seasonal raiding sounds good in theory. Raid in summer, farm in winter. In practice, summer in the North Atlantic is a relative term. It's less cold, not warm. You're still freezing, just not actively dying from it. The sailing season is narrow, and weather doesn't care about your schedule. Leave too early? Spring storms. Leave too late? Autumn hurricanes. The economic model of raiding is fundamentally flawed. You're travelling hundreds of miles to steal. The economic model of raiding is fundamentally flawed. You're travelling hundreds of miles to steal from people who've already been robbed multiple times. It's like driving across country to rob a garage sale. The energy expenditure versus reward ratio is insane. You'd make more money staying home and raising sheep, but the social pressure is real. Young men are expected to go raiding. It's a rite of passage, proof of manhood, a way to gain status. Never mind that most return broken, poor, or not at all. The survivors tell stories that make it sound glorious, and new idiots line up to repeat the cycle. The Viking Age ends not because locals got better at defending, though they did, or because Christianity pacified the Norse, though it helped. It ends because people finally did the math. Raiding is a terrible return on investment. Trading is more profitable and significantly less likely to result in death by dysentery. The smart Vikings figured this out early. Why risk everything raiding when you can trade? Same boats, same routes, but instead of stealing goods while people try to kill you, you exchange goods while people merely overcharge you. It's capitalism instead of piracy, and it's much better for your life expectancy. The transition from raider to trader is gradual. First, you raid a monastery. Next year you trade with the survivors. They're surprisingly willing to deal with you if you're not actively trying to kill them. Who knew? Turns out peaceful commerce is more profitable than violent theft. Revolutionary concept. Some Vikings settle in the lands they used to raid. Not because they conquered them, but because they married locals and decided farming in England beats freezing in Norway. These settlements succeed through integration, not domination. The fearsome Viking warrior becomes Sven the neighbour, complaining about the weather and growing turnips. The real Viking legacy isn't conquest, it's commerce. Those navigation skills developed for raiding become trade routes. The shipbuilding technology enables merchant vessels. The cultural exchange goes both ways. Vikings adopt local customs. Locals adopt Viking innovations. It's almost like peaceful interaction benefits everyone. Wild. So what have we learned from our journey into the reality of Viking raiding? First, the sagas lied. They lied about everything. The glory, the wealth, the adventure, all carefully edited fiction designed to make freezing, starving, and dying from preventable diseases sound appealing. Second, humans will endure incredible hardship for the promise of reward, even when that reward almost never materializes. The psychology of the lottery applies to Viking raids. Everyone knows most raiders fail, but maybe you'll be different. You won't be, but hope springs eternal. Third, the ocean hates you. It's not indifferent, it's actively malevolent. Every wave is trying to kill you. Every storm is personal. The sea remembers every Viking who thought he could master it and takes special pleasure in proving them wrong. Fourth, logistics matter more than courage. You can be the bravest warrior in Scandinavia, but if your food rots and your water runs out, you're just a brave corpse. The mundane details of supply management determine success more than any amount of berserker rage. Fifth, the locals aren't helpless victims waiting to be plundered. They're people defending their homes with the desperation of those who have everything to lose. They're learning, adapting, getting better at killing Vikings. The predator-prey relationship evolves, and eventually the prey develops teeth. Sixth, disease and malnutrition kill more Vikings than combat. The greatest enemy isn't the Saxon with a spear, it's the bacteria in your water supply. Scurvy doesn't care how tough you are. Dysentery doesn't respect your warrior reputation. Biology wins every time. Seventh, the successful Vikings are the ones who quit early. One good raid, then retirement. Use the profits to buy land, settle down, never look at a longboat again. The real warriors are the ones smart enough to recognize a bad career choice and change direction. The romanticization of Viking culture does nobody any favors. It wasn't a glorious age of heroes and adventure. It was a desperate time when people risked everything for the chance of improving their harsh lives, usually failing miserably. The Vikings weren't superhuman warriors. They were ordinary people making extraordinarily bad decisions. Modern depictions of Vikings, the horned helmets, the noble warriors, the glorious battles, are fantasy. The reality was mundane, brutal, and sad. It was farmers with swords freezing in leaky boats, dying for the chance to steal enough to survive another winter. It was economics with extra violence. So next time you see a Viking in popular culture, remember the reality. Remember the frostbite, the scurvy, the dysentery. Remember the failed raids, the mounting debts, the families left behind. Remember that for every saga of glory, there were hundreds of stories of misery that nobody bothered to record. The Vikings weren't legends, they were people. Desperate, cold, hungry people who thought violence was the answer to economic problems. They were wrong, but it took centuries and countless deaths to figure that out. Their legacy isn't conquest. It's a cautionary tale about the cost of choosing violence over cooperation. You wouldn't last a day as a Viking raider, not because you lack courage or strength, but because you have modern knowledge. You know about bacteria, nutrition, and basic economics. You know that risking everything for the chance of minimal reward is gambling, not glory. You know better. The Vikings didn't know better. They lived in a harsh world with limited options. Raiding seemed like a path to wealth and status. Instead, it was a path to misery and early death. The survivors were the exception, not the rule. The sagas remember the exceptions and forget the rule. In the end, the Viking Age is a testament to human endurance and human stupidity in equal measure. People will endure incredible hardship for the promise of reward. They'll believe obvious lies if the lies sound better than the truth. They'll repeat the mistakes of others, convinced they'll be different. You wouldn't last a day as a Viking raider because you're too smart, too soft, and too aware of how bacteria work. These aren't weaknesses, they're evolution. We've learned from the Vikings' mistakes. We've developed better ways to improve our lives that don't involve months of misery in leaky boats. The real lesson of the Vikings isn't about glory or adventure. It's about the cost of choosing violence over cooperation, of believing propaganda over reality, of risking everything for the promise of reward that rarely comes. It's a lesson written in frostbite and scurvy, in failed raids and broken dreams. So thank your ancestors who chose farming over raiding, who picked boring stability over glorious death. Thank the Vikings who quit after one raid and used their profits to build something lasting. Thank everyone who looked at a longboat and said, "No thanks, I'll stay home." Because they were right. Farming is boring, but it's better than freezing. Trading is less exciting than raiding, but it's more profitable. Peace is less dramatic than war, but it lasts longer. The Vikings who figured this out early are the ones whose descendants survived to tell the tale. The sagas sing of glory and gold, but the reality was frozen misery and infected wounds. You wouldn't last a day as a Viking raider, and that's a good thing. It means you've evolved past the point where freezing to death in a leaky boat sounds like a good career move. Sweet dreams, and may your bed always be warmer, drier, and significantly less full of scurvy than a Viking longboat. May your meals be better than hardtack and rotten fish. May your career choices involve less dysentery and more dental coverage. Thanks for joining me tonight. Sleep well, and be grateful you live in an age where improving your life doesn't require months at sea, with 30 unwashed men and a slim chance of survival. Be grateful for boring jobs, stable food supplies, and the knowledge that the ocean, while still dangerous, at least isn't actively trying to kill you. The Vikings were many things: brave, desperate, foolish, human. But mostly they were wrong about raiding being a good idea. Learn from their mistakes. Choose warmth over glory, stability over adventure, and definitely choose modern medicine over whatever the Vikings thought medicine was. Sleep tight, and remember, the most heroic thing you can do is make sensible life choices. The Vikings didn't, and look how that turned out.